Hello and welcome friends. In unit 3 up till now we have discussed the various steps which are part of the advertising process. You would recall that there were 5 basic steps, and out of these 5 steps we have already discussed the first 3 and we have discussed them in significant detail. Now is the time for us to discuss the 4th step in the advertising process, which is basically the media decision, right? So this is going to be our agenda in the few sessions that are lined up from today itself. We'll be talking about the media decision. Now what basically is media? See, you have read in business communication as to what media is. It is basically that mode through which the sender of the information passes on the message to the receiver, and that is what basically media is. So as far as the advertising word is concerned, here also the meaning is the same. So any mode that connects the marketer, the advertiser, to the target audience, that will be called the media, right? So as far as media decision are concerned, basically media decision is all about having the most effective media to deliver the desired number and types of exposure to the target audience. So how are you going to deliver the desired number of exposures? What do we mean by this? For example, you have decided that to be able to sell your product, you want your target audience to get exposed to your advertising campaign at least 3 times. So that is the desired number. So you want your target audience on an average to get exposed to your advertising campaign at least thrice, 3 times. So that is a desired number, right? So how do you ensure that this happens in an effective fashion? So that is what media decision is all about, right? So as far as the media decision is concerned, we have to discuss quite a few things, which includes number 1, deciding the reach, frequency and the impact. Now please understand, these 3 are different terms and they have their own different meanings. So we'll have to first of all understand as to what reach, frequency and impact are, and how do we take a call with respect to these 3. Then next would be to discuss the media type that we have. The third aspect that we'll cover would be within the media type, which particular media vehicle we'll be using. So just to give you an idea, media type is basically, for example, supposing you are using the print media. So that is an example of media type. Within that, Amar Ujala or the Hindu or maybe Hindustan Times or Times of India, they are example of media vehicle. So we have to talk about these 2 aspects, media type and media vehicle. Then we have choosing the media timings. So we'll be talking about macro scheduling as well as micro scheduling in detail, and then we'll be talking about geographical allocation. What do we mean by this? Are you going to launch your ad campaign throughout the market, throughout the country? Then in that case it would be called national advertising. And in case you feel that it is of no use, maybe you are a product, you are a brand which is only selling in northern part of the country, then naturally it is not going to make much sense for you to show your ads in the national media. What you will be doing is you will pick up ad space in different media concentrated in the northern part of the country. So that will be a slightly different approach, and that can be called spot advertising. So that is what we mean by geographical allocation. So that is something that we are going to discuss also in the coming sessions, right? So today we'll be covering the reach, frequency and impact. So let us understand what we mean by reach, frequency and impact, and what is the difference between these 3 terms. Now reach is the number of individuals or households, right? So it may so happen that we decide that we will be taking into account the number of individual customers or individual prospects, or it may so happen that we decide that we'll be taking up households. What do we mean by households? Families. So we can take into account any one of them. So number of individuals or households exposed to particular media schedule at least once during a specific time period. So let me explain to you what we mean by the media schedule, right? Now let's say you have come up with a particular brand, you are launching a new brand in the market, and then you decide that I'll be showing at least 2 ads every weekend on Star TV. Now that is the media schedule. So you'd be showing 2 ads every weekend, that is let's say Saturday and Sunday, on Star TV. So that is what your media schedule is. So on every Saturday and every Sunday, 2 of your ads would be shown on Star TV. This is what media schedule is. And how many people in the target audience get to see at least one of these ads? Now this is what reach is, right? So let's say if, for example, 500 individuals, they have seen your ad at least once. We have decided what the media schedule was. So if they have got exposed to this media schedule, what do we mean by exposed? They have seen this particular ad, right? So let's say 500 of these people, 500 people in the target audience, they have seen this particular ad at least once. Then that would be our reach. This is fine. On the other hand, what will be frequency? Frequency is how many times on an average a member in our target audience is getting exposed to our advertising campaign. So while reach is number of people who have seen your ad at least once, that is what reach is. Frequency is on an average how many times have they seen your ad. Is this okay? So this is the broad difference between reach and frequency, and you should be absolutely clear about it. We'll take up an example also. So let me repeat. Reach is number of people in the target audience who have seen your ad at least once. Kam se kam ek baar. They might have seen your ad twice or thrice. It is immaterial, but at least once they must have seen. And then we will count them when we are trying to measure the reach. And what would be the frequency? Frequency is how many times on an average these people are getting exposed to our ads. So for example, in that 1 month duration when we were showing our ads every weekend on Star TV, on an average, all those who saw our ad, they saw our ad 5 times on an average. Now this would be our frequency. This is fine. So that is the broad difference between reach and frequency. Now what are the situations in which reach is very, very important? When you are launching a new product in the market. Now this is a situation where you need to reach out to as many people as possible, and that is why you will be concentrating on having a high reach, a high value for reach. You would want to reach as many people as possible. You would want as many people as possible to watch your ad or to see your ad or to go through your ad at least once, right? So this is going to be important for you when you are launching a new product in the market or coming up with a new brand in the market. Then when you are coming up with brand extensions, let me tell you what brand extensions are. See, you must have heard of Dettol. Dettol started as antiseptic liquid, but then now we have got Dettol soap also. So the same brand name has now been extended to a slightly different product. So this is an example of a brand extension, right? So whenever you are going for brand extensions, then also you need to have a high value of reach. You need to reach as many people as possible because you want to create this awareness. You want people to be aware that you are launching this new product or when you are coming up with brand extensions. So how do you create that awareness? You need to have a high reach. When the target market is undefined, there also you would need to have a high reach. What do we mean by this? This means that supposing the target market is not clear to you. Of course, we have studied that you start off with segmentation and targeting and positioning, but many a times it may so happen that you are not focusing on a particular segment, so you are not targeting a particular segment, and rather than that you are targeting the whole population, so your target markets are not well defined. In such cases, again, you need to have greater reach. Then again, infrequently purchased brands. Infrequently purchased brands, for example, or products, for example, are those which are purchased after a long duration of time, so you don't purchase them on a frequent basis. So for example, when you purchase a car, once you have purchased a car, you are not going to buy another car for, let's say, 2-3 years. So this is an infrequently purchased item. A mobile handset, or maybe admission to the MBA course in a particular college. So all these things you are purchasing on a very infrequent basis, kabhi kabhar. In such cases also you need to have high reach, right? Now let us talk about frequency. I have told you what is the basic difference between reach and frequency. Now have a look at the definition. Average number of times that an average individual, I told you, individual or families, we can take up at any of these as our units. So you can go for measuring the number of individuals who have been exposed to your ad, or you can talk about the number of households, number of families who have seen your ad, right? So average number of times that an average individual is exposed to advertising message. So how many times on an average one member of your target audience sees your ad? I took this example a little while ago and I said, let's say that if my target audience on an average sees my ad 5 times during the month when I was showing my ad on Star TV on weekends, then the frequency is 5. So how many times on an average is my ad being watched or being read by the target audience? So that is what frequency is all about, right? And I hope you understand that frequency would be very, very important in some of these situations where, let me talk about this particular aspect first. Frequency is going to be very, very important when something is purchased on a very regular basis. For example, soaps, for example, salt. These are the items which are purchased on a frequent basis. So naturally, if the customer is purchasing these items on a very frequent basis, you have to be a brand which occupies top of the mind recall as far as that particular customer is concerned. So whenever he goes to the market and he buys a particular item, it is your brand that he should be able to remember first, so that he may go on to buy your brand. And that is why it's very, very important to keep on exposing that particular customer to your brand name. And how will you do this? Through the advertising campaign. So wherever the items are purchased on a very regular basis, you talk about Pepsi, Coca-Cola and such non-alcoholic carbonated beverages. You talk about FMCG products, fast moving consumer goods. Why do we call them fast moving? Because they are purchased on a very frequent basis. So they move out of the shelf, the shop's shelf, very quickly, and that is why they are called fast moving consumer goods. So in such cases you will see that the advertising frequency has to be higher. On the other hand, if you are a marketer of cars, then you can do without a high frequency. You will have to rather focus on the reach, right? Again, frequency is going to be important when you are facing intense competition. There are lots of rivals in the market, lots of competitors in the market. So what would you want? You would want to be the first brand to be considered by your target audience whenever he plans to make a particular purchase. And how you can do that? There are so many rivals, so many market rivals, so many competitors, you will have to have a very high frequency, which means you need to expose your target audience to your ads on a very frequent basis so that he remembers your brand whenever he is planning to make a particular purchase. So whenever the competition is very intense, you have to go for very high frequency of your promotional campaign. Again, when the customers are resistant to buying your product and you want to make them more favorable towards buying your product, then again you need to have a very high frequency. And again, when their forgetting rates are very high, when the customer tends to forget your advertising message very fast, in such cases again you will have to advertise on a more frequent basis, right? So these are the situations wherein you have to have a very high frequency, you will have to advertise very frequently. On the other hand, these are the situations specifically when you want to generate awareness. There the frequency is not important, what is important is reach. You want to reach as many people as possible. Now please understand that there's a terminology which is known as gross rating points, GRP, and this is nothing but the product of reach and frequency. We'll be taking up an example to understand this better. So total number of exposure, so what was the reach, and on an average how many times did one particular individual get exposed to your promotional campaign. So the product of reach and frequency would be your total gross rating points. Then let us talk about the qualitative aspect, which is impact. Now what do we mean by impact? Please understand. Impact is basically the qualitative value, congruence of an exposure through a given media. I hope you remember the meaning of this particular word, congruent media. We have discussed this in the very last session wherein I talked about the congruent surroundings, right? So what do we mean by congruence? For example, if you want to sell Hanuman Chalisa, let's say, or let's say you want to sell Bhagavad Gita, which particular media vehicle would be more appropriate to you? Would it be the Astha channel or would it be the MTV? Naturally it would be the Astha channel. So basically this is what we term as congruence, right? The product that you are selling and the media vehicle that you are using to broadcast your message, to let the target audience know about your product, about your brand, these two should be of similar nature. So for example, if you are planning to advertise your car, it would make sense for you to go for Star TV rather than to go for Astha TV. This is fine. Again, for example, if you are planning to sell sports equipment, you are a marketer of sports equipment, bat, ball, football, all these things you are selling, don't you think it would be a better idea for you to advertise on ESPN Sports or Star Cricket rather than advertising it on maybe the Discovery Channel? So this is what we mean by congruence, right? Higher the level of congruence, greater would be the impact of your advertising campaign, of your promotion campaign, right? I have taken up this example. Car advertisement on MTV is going to be more impactful because again there's certain amount of congruence between what you are trying to sell, that is the car, and the channel through which you are trying to sell it, the media through which you are communicating to the prospective customer about your brand, about your car. So that particular media you are using is the MTV. So there's a congruence between the two, and that is why car advertisements on MTV are going to be more impactful and more effective rather than showcasing these advertisements on, as I said, Astha channel, right? And now that we have understood impact, now let us move to another terminology, another very important terminology, which is the weighted number of exposures. Now what do we mean by the weight? weight basically refers to the impact, right? So weight basically refers to the impact. So weighted number of exposure is nothing but reach multiplied by frequency multiplied by impact. So this is what the weighted number of exposures are, right? So this is the short form WE. So basically, or in other words, you can say that weighted number of exposure is basically the gross rating points, reach into frequency, the gross rating points into the impact. So this is what weighted number of exposure is all about. Now we'll take up an example to understand all these concepts better. But before that, we need to understand, as I said, that we need to take a call as to what will be the reach of our promotional campaign, what will be the frequency, what kind of impact we are aiming at, and see there is a certain trade-off between reach and frequency. What do we mean by a trade-off? Trade-off means you cannot have the best of both the worlds. You cannot have a very high reach and a very high frequency. This is going to be very costly for you. So if you want to have a high reach, you'll have to compromise on the frequency aspect. You'll have to reduce the frequency. And if you want a very high frequency, then you will have to reduce the reach. You cannot target a high reach and a high frequency simultaneously, right? Let us understand why this is so. Supposing you are targeting greater reach. So you want to reach all the customers across the country. Are you going to advertise on Amar Ujala? Let's say you are coming up with a print ad. You are not going to advertise on Amar Ujala because in South, naturally, people are not going to read Amar Ujala. Amar Ujala would not be a prominent newspaper there. So in case you want to go for higher reach, you want to reach out to all the members in the target audience across the country, then probably Amar Ujala is not going to be a good choice. A better choice would be a newspaper which is selling across the country. It could be the Times of India. But then, if you go for Times of India, since it is getting sold across the country, naturally it would be costlier for you. You'll have to pay more to advertise your brand on Times of India when you compare it with how much you would have had to pay had you advertised your brand on Amar Ujala, right? So naturally, if you aim at greater reach, you'll have to pay more and it would become costlier for you. And if it is already costly, why would you want to increase the cost further by increasing the frequency? So what you will do is you will compromise on the frequency part. You will reduce the frequency. So you have aimed at a very higher reach. For that you have inserted your advertisements. You have placed your advertisements on Times of India, but since it is going to be costly, so you reduce the frequency. This is fine. So this is what the trade-off is between reach and frequency. On the other hand, let me give an example. Suppose you want to show your ad very, very frequently on Star TV. Don't you think it is going to be difficult for you to do this? Why? Because Star TV has a wide reach. It is reaching the various households across the country. And if you are advertising on Star TV, naturally it is going to be costlier. So you cannot have a very high frequency because then your cost would be even higher. So what will you do is, rather than going for Star TV, you would want to go for television channels like ETV, which basically target the UP and the Uttarakhand market. There you can advertise your product more frequently because they would be less costlier because their reach is only limited to UP and Uttarakhand. This is fine. So that is the trade-off between reach and frequency. Again, for high impact, you have to use Congruent Media. We have discussed this example, and that is why when you switch on the Astha channel, you find that so many Raksha Yantra, so many Bhagavad Gitas are being sold, so many ads you see there. And you also see ads of Ayurvedic remedies on Astha TV. On the other hand, if there is, let's say, a popular music app, then probably the ad is more likely to be shown on channels like Colors or MTV, right? So that is what we mean by going for a congruent media to increase your impacts, to increase your level of impact, to increase your effectiveness. Now, as I said that we'll be talking about these aspects by taking up an example. So I've taken up this particular example. Now please understand, the first column talks about the kind of ad that we are coming up with, and then we have got the reach, second column, and then the frequency, and then we have talked about the gross rating points. You understand and you remember that it is nothing but the product of reach and frequency. Then we'll talk about impact, and then the weighted exposures, which is nothing but reach into frequency into impact. This is something that we've already discussed in the last slide. Now let us have a look at this particular table and let us try and understand what it is trying to convey. Now, temple donation advertisements in Astha channel. Supposing the reach of this particular channel is 20. I have taken up these hypothetical numbers just to make you understand the concept, just to help you understand the concept. So don't think that it actually happens like this in the real world. So I have taken up small numbers just for convenience, right? Now, temple donation advertisements, supposing you are coming up with advertisements and you are appealing for donations to build a particular temple. So basically you are coming up with these advertisements, and let us say that you have shown these ads on the Astha channel. The reach is 20, so it has reached, let's say, 20 households. And how many times have you shown this particular ad? 10 times on an average. What does this mean? This means that on an average these 20 households get exposed to your ad campaign at least 10 times, right? Then you have the temple donation advertisement again on the colors channel, right? However, you would know that colors channel is a more popular channel than Astha channel, and that is why the reach is higher. You see, the reach is almost 5 times, which means that naturally color channels is more popular, is being watched by more number of households, so naturally the reach is higher. But however, when the reach is higher, you simply cannot spend a lot, and that is why what you do is you reduce your frequency. So on an average you are ensuring that the members in the target audience are getting exposed to your ad at least 3 times, right? Now the gross rating points in both the cases are, in the first case it is 200, in the second case it is 270. This is fine, right? So you can see that the gross rating points are almost equal. However, since this is an ad which is seeking donations from the audience so that a particular temple can be built, don't you think this ad is going to be more effective when shown on a congruent media, which would be the Astha channel? And that is why the impact would be almost 5 times of the impact here when the ad was shown on the colors channel, right? And that is why the weighted exposure here would be 200 R into F, 200 into 5 is equal to 1000. So this is the weighted exposure score. On the other hand, the impact is very, very low, because those who want to donate money for such causes, they probably would not be watching the colors channel. So that is why we are saying that the impact is going to be very, very low. It is almost 1, right? And the weighted exposure would be 270, right? What I'm trying to tell you, that first thing is that impact is very, very important, right? If you see the GRP, the gross rating points here, there was not a very significant difference between these two when we were showing our ad on Astha and when we were showing our ad on colors. However, when we have also included the impact to find weighted exposure, see the difference. So naturally it makes sense for us to go for the Astha channel. See, the value of weighted exposure is much more here, almost 4 times that of the value here. Is that fine? Now again, let us talk about the car advertisement. Which particular media or which particular vehicle, let us say, is going to be more congruent for you? Don't you think between Astha and colors, the more congruent media would be the colors channel. Naturally, why? Because you are selling your cars, and that is why the impact would be higher here while the impact would be lower here. Is that fine? Again, the reach is 20 in case of Astha, and in case of colors channel the reach is 90. The frequency is equal to 10, which means on an average the target audience is getting exposed to your ad at least 10 times. On the other hand, the frequency here is 1, and we have calculated the GRPs. GRP for Astha channel is 200 while for the colors channel is 90. But what has happened now is that the impact was much greater here, and that is why the weighted exposure is weighted exposure score is almost thrice of the score here. Now the idea is that if you are trying to come up with this kind of an ad campaign, it is better to go for Astha channel, and when you are going to sell your car or a particular brand of car, then it is perfectly fine for you to advertise your product on the colors channel. Is that making sense? Okay. Now understand one more thing, and this aspect has to be understood well. Ad exposure is more important, not just vehicle exposure. Now what do we mean by vehicle exposure? You know, exposure is when the audience is watching your ad or reading through your ad. So that is the exposure. Now what is important is ad exposure and not just vehicle exposure. Now what do we mean by this? See, just a while ago I talked about media type and media vehicle. Let's say you have decided that you will go for print ad, so that is media type, and within the print ad you decided that the media vehicle would be Amar Ujala, right? So that would be the media vehicle. Now it is not at all of any significance whether my target audience is reading the Amar Ujala newspaper or not, because if they are only reading the Amar Ujala newspaper and they are simply ignoring my ad which is there on that particular newspaper, then this is a case of vehicle exposure. So my audience got exposed to the vehicle that I was using. They read the newspaper Amar Ujala, but they did not actually see my ad. So the ad exposure was 0. However, what is important is to have ad exposure rather than having vehicle exposure. Fine. So let us say if you have come up with an ad and you are showing that ad on the Santushti television network, the local cable network here in Pithoragarh. So if somebody only watches the channel but they ignore your ad, or they somehow miss out watching your ad, then this would be an example of vehicle exposure. Your target audience got exposed to the vehicle but they never got exposed to your ad. On the other hand, if they also watch your ad, then this would be ad exposure as well. So what is important for us is to have ad exposure and not just vehicle exposure. So we don't want people to read Amar Ujala. No, we don't want that. That would be an example of vehicle exposure. We want people to read the ad that we have placed in Amar Ujala. That would be ad exposure, and what is more important is ad exposure. So that is all for the day. It probably got a little trickier towards the end, but my advice to you is to replay the video wherever you find it difficult to grasp the concepts, and please be very sure about these concepts because they are going to be used in future also. So thank you very much for your time.